Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. The first sign something was wrong came during a quarterly review of his household expenses. Lowell Wolf sat in his home office, methodically comparing credit card statements against his meticulous records. A $4,500 charge from a high-end electronics store caught his eye, a transaction he hadn't made. "Marcus," he called out, his voice carrying through the Victorian-style home he'd restored himself. "Could you come here for a minute?" His 17-year-old son appeared in the doorway, already defensive in posture. The boy had his mother's features, high cheekbones, and amber eyes. But lately, Lowell had noticed something else in his expression. Something calculating. "What's up, Dad?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe, trying too hard to appear casual. "This charge." Lowell turned the monitor slightly. "Want to explain?" "Oh, that," Marcus shrugged. "It's just some gaming equipment. Mom's friend from work helped me pick it out." Lowell kept his face neutral, though his mind was already cataloging the inconsistencies. "Your mother's friend has an interest in gaming setups. David knows a lot about everything," Marcus said, a hint of admiration creeping into his voice. "He said I deserved something nice for getting my grades up." "David Blackwood, your mother's boss." "Yeah, he's cool." Marcus shifted his weight. "Mom said it was fine." "Did she?" Lowell turned back to his screen. "That's interesting, considering we agreed on a strict allowance system." "Dad, come on. It's not like we can't afford it," Marcus replied, his voice carrying an edge of entitlement mixed with disdain. "You're always going on about financial responsibility. But David says sometimes you need to enjoy life. David seems to have a lot of opinions about our family matters." Lowell's tone remained measured, but his fingers had stopped typing. "You've been spending time with him." "Sometimes I hang out at the firm after school. Mom's usually working late anyway." Marcus pushed off from the doorframe. "Are we done? I've got homework." Lowell nodded, watching his son retreat back. 20 years as a forensic accountant had taught him to trust patterns, and this pattern was screaming at him. Later that evening, Ruby breezed in past 9, a designer briefcase in one hand, a takeout in the other. Her silk blouse was artfully rumpled, her lipstick fresh. Not the look of someone who'd been hunched over drafting tables all day. Traffic was terrible, she announced to the empty kitchen, startling when she noticed Lowell at the table. "Oh, you're still up. Interesting day of the firm?" Lowell asked mildly, noting how she avoided his eyes while unpacking her barely touched dinner. "The usual. The Singapore project is in crunch time." Ruby's laugh was professionally practiced. "David's really pushing for perfection on this one." David Lowell took a sip of his whiskey. "He seems very invested in our family lately." Ruby's movements still for a fraction of a second. "What do you mean?" "The gaming setup he bought Marcus." Lowell watched her face carefully. "Quite generous of him." "Oh, that," Ruby waved dismissively. "It was a bonus thing for all the staff's kids. You know how these big firms are always trying to build loyalty." The lie was smooth and practiced. Lowell wondered how many others had preceded it. "Funny," he mused. "Marcus said it was specially picked out for him for his grades." Ruby's smile tightened. "Well, you know how teenagers are always trying to feel special. David's just being nice." "David's being something," Lowell agreed, finishing his drink. "But nice isn't the word I'd choose." Over the next few weeks, Lowell watched. He noted Ruby's increasing absences, her defensive reactions to simple questions. He observed Marcus's new clothes, the expensive watch that appeared on his wrist, the way he spoke about David with an almost desperate need for approval. The breaking point came during a rare family dinner. Ruby's phone buzzed continuously until she excused herself to handle an emergency at work. Through the dining room window, Lowell watched her pace the garden, laughing into her phone with an animation he hadn't seen in months. That night, after Ruby had gone to bed, Lowell made a call. "Jack, it's Lowell Wolf. Remember that security system we discussed? I'd like to move forward. Full coverage, highest grade. And Jack, I need this kept completely confidential. The installation took place while Ruby was at a weekend conference and Marcus was at a friend's house. Jack's team worked efficiently, hiding cameras and microphones throughout the house. The feeds were routed to a secure server only Lowell could access. Everything's set, Jack confirmed, packing up his tools. Video and audio, motion activated with encrypted backup. You'll be able to access it all remotely. He hesitated. Lowell, are you sure about this? Once you start watching, you can't unsee things. In my line of work, Jack, the truth always comes out eventually. Lowell's smile was grim. Better to control when and how. The first few days yielded nothing unusual. But on Thursday afternoon, while supposedly at work, Lowell watched Ruby come home early with Marcus. They moved through the kitchen, Ruby pouring wine while Marcus grabbed a soda. Your father's been asking questions, Ruby said, her tone dripping with contempt. About David's gifts. Marcus slouched against the counter. So, Dad's always suspicious. It's like his whole job. Your father, Ruby's lip curled, is nothing but a walking ATM. He thinks his little investigations make him important. But David actually builds things, creates things. He's going to take us to his beach house once the divorce is final. He's already set up your college fund in his office across town. Lowell's hands tightened on his desk. That's cool, Marcus said, looking uncertain. Does David know I've been copying Dad's financial records like you asked? There's some strange stuff about offshore accounts he investigates. Maybe we can use that. Ruby's smile was predatory. David knows exactly what he's doing, honey. Your father thinks he's so clever with his forensic accounting. But he has no idea what's really going on. David's been 3 steps ahead this whole time. Marcus hesitated. Sometimes I feel bad. Dad's always been. Your father, Ruby cut in sharply, is a small man with small ambitions. David can give us everything we've ever wanted. You trust me, don't you? Yeah, Mom. Of course. Lowell closed his laptop, his mind already racing ahead to contingencies and countermoves. He'd known something was wrong. But this was worse than simple infidelity. Over the next week, the cameras revealed more. Ruby and David met in the house while Lowell was supposedly at work. Their conversations made it clear this wasn't just an affair. David was using Ruby to access information about Lowell's cases, particularly those involving suspicious offshore accounts. Your husband's getting close to some sensitive areas, David told Ruby during one encounter. It would be a shame if his investigation got derailed by some personal problems. He's completely clueless, Ruby assured him, running her hands over David's expensive suit. Marcus has been absolutely perfect, so eager to help. Just like you said, a few gifts, some attention, and he'll do anything we ask. That's my girl. David's smile never reached his eyes. And you're sure about the offshore accounts, the Hong Kong connections? Ruby asked. Marcus found everything you flagged. Lowell's totally focused on the money laundering angles. He has no idea about the bigger picture. What they didn't know was that Lowell had already been building a case against David's architectural firm. For months, he'd been tracking suspicious patterns in their international projects, buildings that cost far more on paper than in reality, contracts that made no financial sense, money flowing through a maze of shell companies. Now it all clicked into place. David wasn't just trying to stay ahead of the investigation. He was actively using Ruby and Marcus to gather intelligence. The affair, the gifts, the manipulation of his son. It was all part of a calculated plan. In his office, Lowell reviewed the footage again, his expression hardening. He'd seen this pattern before in his investigations. Criminals using personal relationships to compromise potential witnesses. But to target his own family, he picked up his phone, dialing a familiar number. Peggy. It's Lowell Wolf. Remember the conversation we had about Blackwood architecture? I think it's time to move this investigation to the next level. And Peggy, this just got personal. The FBI agent's voice was grim. How personal are we talking? He's compromised my wife and son, using them to access confidential case files. Jesus, Lowell. Peggy paused. This goes deeper than adultery. We've been watching Blackwood's firm for years. But we need concrete proof of the money laundering. I'll get you proof. Lowell's voice was steel. But first, I need to protect my son, even if it's from himself. That evening, Lowell watched through the cameras as Ruby and Marcus huddled in the study, going through his files. His son's face was eager, desperate to please, while Ruby praised him lavishly for each document he found. David's going to be so impressed, Ruby cooed. You're really proving yourself, honey. Soon we'll be done with all this pretense. No more boring family dinners. No more lectures about responsibility. David knows what it's like to think big. Marcus beamed at the praise, but something flickered in his eyes, doubt, perhaps, or guilt. Mom, what exactly is David going to do with all this stuff about Dad's cases? Don't worry about that. Ruby's tone sharpened. Just focus on being helpful. David rewards loyalty. You know that. Think about that new card he mentioned. Lowell had seen enough. He began composing an email to his lawyer, attaching selected clips from the surveillance footage. It was time to act. But he had to be careful. David hadn't built his criminal enterprise by being careless, and Lowell knew from his investigations that people who crossed David had a habit of facing devastating personal and professional consequences. But David had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed Lowell was like his other victims, so focused on financial crimes that he'd missed the human element. He'd underestimated the skills that made Lowell the city's leading forensic accountant. Patience, attention to detail, and an understanding that numbers always told a story if you knew how to read them. Now, watching his wife and son conspire against him, Lowell felt no anger. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, he felt a cold, professional clarity. David wanted to play chess. Fine, but he'd soon learn that in chess, as in forensic accounting, the key to winning was seeing the whole board. Lowell pressed a button on his phone. Jack, I need one more favor. Those cameras we installed. Add another layer of backup. Something off-site. Something absolutely unbreakable. Things are about to get interesting. He turned back to his computer, beginning to type. The evidence was mounting. But he needed more. David had destroyed families before. Lowell would make damn sure his family would be the last. The game was on, and Lowell Wolf played to win. Lowell Wolf sat in his private office downtown, reviewing surveillance footage with FBI agent Peggy Conley. The wall of monitors showed different angles of his home, each frame a piece of evidence in the growing case against David Blackwood. This isn't the first time, Peggy said, pausing a clip of Ruby coaching Marcus on what files to copy. Blackwood's pattern goes back years. Show me. Lowell's voice remained steady, professional. Peggy pulled out a thick file. Thomas Chin, former client of yours. His wife worked at Blackwood Architecture. After she filed for divorce, Chin was found dead in his garage. Suicide, apparently triggered by evidence that he'd been embezzling from clients. She laid down another file. Maria Rodriguez. Similar story. Her husband worked for Blackwood. She killed herself after being accused of tax fraud. Both cases, the surviving spouse moved in with Blackwood shortly after. And the children. Used. Every time. Peggy's disgust was evident. Blackwood grooms them with gifts, attention, gets them to turn on the target parent. Once everything's done, he discards them. Lowell steepled his fingers. You've been watching him for years, but he's careful. The suicides look legitimate. The financial crimes appeared real. We could never prove the connection. Peggy leaned forward. Until now, you're the first target who spotted the pattern before it was too late. Because he got greedy, Lowell pulled up financial records on his computer. Look at these construction projects in Singapore, Dubai, Hong Kong. On paper, they're architectural masterpieces. In reality, He clicked through satellite images, empty lots, half-finished buildings, the perfect front for laundering billions. We need concrete proof linking him to the money laundering. Peggy hesitated. Lowell, he's going to come after you hard. These other cases, he destroys people. Completely. Let him try. Lowell's smile was cold. He thinks he's playing chess, but he doesn't realize the game started long before he made his first move. Across town, in David Blackwood's penthouse office, Ruby paced nervously while David reviewed the copied files. "This is good, David," he murmured, his manicured fingers tracing lines of data. "Your husband's been quite thorough in his investigations." "Too thorough," Ruby said. "He suspects something, David." David's laugh was dismissive. "Questions are all he'll have time for once we're done." He reached into his desk, pulling out legal documents. "Everything's prepared. The divorce filing, the custody suit, the evidence of his criminal activities." Ruby frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, darling." David's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Did you think those files Marcus copied were just about my business? Every document, every access lock. It all builds a lovely picture of a forensic accountant using his position to help criminals hide money. Your signature is on half these papers, by the way." Ruby paled. "I never signed anything." "Are you sure?" David held up a perfect forgery. "The courts will believe otherwise. And Marcus's testimony about Daddy's suspicious late-night work habits will seal it. You said we were just gathering leverage for the divorce." "Leverage, destruction, it's all the same in the end." David stood, straightening his custom suit. "Now shall we discuss how you'll present yourself as the concerned wife who discovered her husband's actions?" At home, Marcus sat in his room, surrounded by expensive gifts that now felt like chains. His phone buzzed with another message from David, with instructions about which files to copy next. His finger hovered over the delete button, but fear kept him from pressing it. A knock at his door made him jump. "Marcus." It was his father. "Got a minute?" Lowell entered, his face unreadable. He glanced at the gaming setup, the designer clothes, the new phone. All of David's bribes laid out like evidence. "Dad, Marcus began. "Save it." Lowell's voice was quiet but firm. "I know everything. The files you've been copying, the lies you've been telling, the plan to testify against me." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "How?" "Because unlike David, I don't underestimate people." Lowell sat on the edge of the bed. "Right now, you have a choice to make. Keep playing David's game and go down with him, or tell me everything and help me in this." "He'll kill me," Marcus whispered. "No." Lowell's certainty was absolute. "He won't get the chance." The next morning, Ruby filed for divorce. Her lawyer, handpicked by David, presented a devastating case. Lowell was unstable, possibly criminal, definitely unfit for custody. They had evidence, witnesses, even signed documents showing his involvement in international money laundering. The judge, a stern woman named Helena Rodriguez, reviewed the files with a frown. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Wolfe." "I had no choice but to come forward," Ruby said. Her practice was disturbingly perfect. "When Marcus showed me what he'd found in Lowell's office," Ruby continued. About that, Lowell's lawyer, James Chun, stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to present some evidence of our own." The courtroom screens lit up with surveillance footage. Ruby and David, coaching Marcus on what to say in court. Ruby practicing her concerned wife testimony. David explaining how the forged documents would destroy Lowell's reputation. Furthermore, Chum continued, as Ruby's face went ashen, "We have evidence that this pattern of behavior, using spouse and children to create false criminal allegations, has resulted in at least 2 suicides." The judge's expression hardened. "Mrs. Wolfe, are you aware that attempting to manipulate court testimony is a felony?" Ruby looked desperately at her lawyer, but he was already packing his briefcase. "Your Honor," he said quickly, "I had no knowledge of these actions. I move to withdraw as counsel. Motion granted. Judge Rodriguez turned to Ruby. Given the evidence of attempted fraud upon this court, I am granting immediate temporary full custody to Mr. Wolf. Additionally, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Ruby stood, swaying. You don't understand. David, he has plans. He'll destroy me. Lowell's voice was calm. Like Thomas Chin, like Maria Rodriguez, the FBI is very interested in those cases. Ruby, very interested indeed. Later that day, Marcus sat in Lowell's office, hands shaking as he wrote out his statement for the FBI. He'll know I talked, Marcus said. Mom will tell him. Your mother, Lowell replied, is currently being interviewed by federal agents, and David has bigger problems. As if on cue, Peggy called. It's done. We're executing search warrants at Blackwood Architecture and all their international offices. David tried to run, but we had teams in place. Let me guess, he tried to blame everything on Ruby. Of course, claimed she was the mastermind that she forced him to participate. He's throwing everyone under the bus. Partners, employees, even his own brother. Classic narcissist, Lowell mused. Record everything he says. Each betrayal is another nail in his coffin. There's more, Peggy added. We found his private servers. The evidence about Chin and Rodriguez, Lowell, it's worse than we thought. He didn't just frame them. He orchestrated everything down to making their suicides look convincing. Get protection on Ruby and Marcus. Lowell ordered. Peggy continued. Not for their sake, but we need their testimony already done. And Lowell, the Singapore project, it's not just money laundering. We're talking billions in criminal enterprises, terrorist financing. This is going to be huge. After hanging up, Lowell found Marcus still at his desk, looking lost. What happens now? The boy asked. Now, Lowell began, gather the evidence that will destroy David Blackwood's empire. Now we show them what happens when they target the wrong family. Across town, David sat in an interrogation room, his expensive suit wrinkled, his arrogance cracking. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, financial records, testimony from other victims. His carefully constructed world was crumbling. I want a deal, he demanded. The FBI agent smiled. Mr. Blackwood, you misunderstand. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to bury you. In the observation room, Peggy watched with satisfaction. Your move, you deceiver. David's response was to try turning on Ruby one final time. He spun an elaborate tale of how she had masterminded everything, using her position and her son to access confidential information, manipulating him into participating. But Lowell had anticipated this too. The surveillance system hadn't just recorded conversations. It had captured every email, every phone call, every digital breadcrumb showing David's long history of manipulation and destruction. Ruby, faced with the collapse of her planned future, broke under questioning. She revealed everything. The long-term plan to destroy Lowell, the careful grooming of Marcus, the network of offshore accounts and shell companies hiding billions in criminal proceeds. He promised we'd be rich, she sobbed to the investigators. He said Lowell was holding us back, that Marcus deserved better. And you believed him. The investigator's tone was incredulous. Despite knowing what happened to his previous victims, he said they were weak. Ruby whispered that they destroyed themselves because they couldn't handle the pressure. I thought we were different. Meanwhile, Marcus began working with federal prosecutors, detailing years of manipulation, the expensive gifts, the careful coaching, the way David had exploited his teenage desire for independence and material things. He made it seem exciting at first. Marcus explained to the prosecutors, like we were in on some big secret. Every time I helped them, there'd be some new reward. But then it became threatening. Lowell finished sitting in on the interview as his son's guardian. Marcus nodded. He started talking about what would happen if I didn't cooperate, how Dad would go to jail, lose everything, how it would be my fault. The prosecutor made notes. Did Mr. Blackwood ever explicitly threaten you? Not directly. He was too smart for that. But he'd tell stories about other kids who disappointed him, how their lives fell apart. As the case built, Lowell's original investigation into Blackwood architecture expanded. The firm's legitimate projects had been a front for a massive criminal enterprise, laundering money for organizations ranging from drug cartels to terrorist groups. The architectural plans were brilliant. An FBI forensic accountant explained to Lowell, each project inflated by millions, the excess funneled through a maze of contractors and suppliers. Without your initial investigation into the Hong Kong connections, we might never have seen the pattern. Lowell allowed himself a small smile. David got sloppy. He was so focused on destroying me personally, he missed the bigger picture. Classic narcissist behavior, Peggy agreed. His need to dominate and destroy on a personal level blindsided him to the professional threat. The evidence mounted daily. Other families came forward, describing similar patterns of manipulation and destruction. David's carefully cultivated image as a successful businessman crumbled, revealing the predator beneath. Ruby, realizing she'd been just another pawn in David's game, attempted to salvage something by offering full cooperation. Her testimony revealed the detailed workings of David's operation, how he selected targets, groomed their families, and systematically destroyed anyone who might expose him. He had it down to a science, she explained bitterly during one debriefing. Find someone investigating his business, identify their vulnerabilities, use their own family to destroy them. I thought I was special. That Marcus and I were different. You weren't, Lowell stated flatly. You were just another move in his game. The investigation expanded internationally. Raids on Blackwood architecture offices worldwide uncovered evidence of criminal enterprises on a massive scale. David had built a global network of corruption, using architectural projects as cover for money laundering and worse. Through it all, Lowell remained focused, methodical. Each piece of evidence was carefully documented. Each witness statement meticulously recorded. He worked closely with the FBI, turning his forensic accounting skills to unraveling David's financial empire. You're taking this very calmly, Peggy observed one evening as they reviewed case files. Why wouldn't I be? Lowell looked up from a particularly complex money trail. He thought he could use my family to destroy me. Instead, he gave me everything I needed to destroy him. Most men would be angry, betrayed. Anger clouds judgment. Lowell replied, and betrayal implies surprise. I'm a forensic accountant, Peggy. I follow the evidence. The numbers always tell the truth, even when people lie. The case was building into one of the largest financial crime investigations in the city's history. David's attempt to destroy one man had led to the unraveling of a criminal enterprise worth billions. His personal vendetta had become his undoing. And through it all, the surveillance system in Lowell's home continued recording, documenting every conversation, every attempt at damage control, every revelation of just how deep the conspiracy went. The truth, as Lowell had always known, was his most powerful weapon. 6 months into the investigation, Lowell stood at the window of his downtown office, watching federal agents escort another of David's associates into a waiting vehicle. The evidence had snowballed into an avalanche, burying everyone in David's criminal enterprise. His phone buzzed. Peggy Conley. David's gone, she said without preamble. Private jet to a non-extradition country. But he left something behind. Ruby. She just found out. All their accounts are empty. The college fund he promised Marcus never existed. The beach house, sold last week to a shell corporation. Lowell's reflection showed no surprise. How's she taking it? Not well. She's facing federal charges for corporate espionage and interfering with an ongoing investigation. David's departure letter to her was illuminating. Let me guess, he blamed everything on her, along with detailed instructions on how she should take the fall for him. Called her a useful fool. The letters dripped with contempt. Peggy paused. We're offering her a deal in exchange for testimony. She'll take it, Lowell said. Ruby always chooses self-preservation. The investigation had revealed the true scope of David's operation. Blackwood Architecture wasn't just laundering money. It was a sophisticated criminal enterprise spanning continents. Each architectural project masked billions in illegal transactions. Each office romance concealed careful manipulation and blackmail. In the federal building downtown, Ruby sat across from prosecutors. Her designer clothes now wrinkled, her makeup streaked. "How much?" she whispered, staring at the bank statements. Every account emptied. The prosecutor confirmed. Mr. Blackwood began transferring funds the day after the raid. By the time you checked, he'd moved everything offshore. He promised. Ruby's voice cracked. The house in the Hamptons, Marcus's education. Mrs. Wolfe. The prosecutor's tone was clinical. We've documented Mr. Blackwood's pattern across multiple victims. He never intended to fulfill those promises. You were a means to an end, accessing your husband's investigation into his criminal enterprise. I thought I was different, Ruby said. Special. That's what the others thought too, before they ended their lives. Meanwhile, Marcus faced his own reckoning. As a juvenile accomplice, he had choices to make and consequences to face. The FBI wants your full testimony, Lowell explained in the conference room of his lawyer's office. Everything David asked you to do. Every file you copied. Every conversation you witnessed. What if I don't? Marcus's attempt at defiance was undermined by fear. Then you face charges as an adult. Lowell's voice remained steady. David used you to access federal investigation records. That's a serious crime. He said you were the criminal, that you were hiding money for bad people. And you believed him. It wasn't a question. Tell me, Marcus, in all the files you copied, did you ever find evidence of that? Marcus looked away. No, but you kept copying them anyway. For the gifts, for his approval. Lowell placed a document on the table. Sign the plea agreement. Testify honestly. It's your only path forward. What about Mom? Your mother made her choices. Lowell stood. Now she faces the consequences. The federal case expanded daily. David's architectural firm had laundered billions for drug cartels, terrorist organizations, and corrupt officials worldwide. Each legitimate project concealed layers of criminal transactions. It's brilliant in a way, an FBI forensic accountant explained during a briefing. Construction costs are naturally variable. Who questions if a building costs 20% more than estimated? Multiply that across hundreds of projects, and you've hidden billions in plain sight. Lowell finished. Ruby's testimony proved valuable. Facing serious federal charges, she detailed years of David's operations, the careful grooming of employees, the systematic exploitation of their families, the elaborate money laundering schemes. He had a formula, she explained to investigators. Find someone investigating him, identify their vulnerabilities, use their families to destroy them. I helped him do it. Why? He made me feel special, chosen. Ruby's laugh was bitter. He said Lowell was beneath me, that someone with my talent deserved better. I was so blind. And Marcus. David said children were the perfect weapon against their parents. They're old enough to be useful but young enough to be easily manipulated. Ruby's voice cracked. I let him use my son. In juvenile court, Marcus faced Judge Sarah Chun. His testimony about David's manipulation had helped the investigation, but actions had consequences. While the court acknowledges your cooperation, Judge Chun stated, the fact remains that you knowingly participated in accessing confidential federal records. Your age and the circumstances of manipulation are mitigating factors. But this behavior cannot go unpunished. The sentence was fair. Juvenile detention followed by rehabilitation, mandatory counseling, and supervised probation. During a supervised visit before beginning his sentence, Marcus finally broke down. I was just a pawn to them. He never cared about me. He wanted access to your cases. No, Lowell corrected, his voice firm. He wanted to destroy me and you. The silence stretched between them. "What happens now?" Marcus asked finally. "You serve your sentence. You complete the rehabilitation program. You learn from this." Lowell stood. "The rest depends on you." Months passed. The investigation expanded internationally, with law enforcement agencies worldwide unraveling David's network. The man himself remained elusive, protected by his wealth and connections in countries without extradition treaties. Ruby accepted a plea deal, trading testimony for a reduced sentence. The evidence of her willing participation in corporate espionage and interference with federal investigations was too strong to avoid prison entirely. 3 years, she told Lowell after the sentencing, plus losing all parental rights. "Actions have consequences," he replied simply. "He played us all," Ruby said, "used us like chess pieces." "No," Lowell's voice was cold. "Chess pieces don't choose to betray their family. That was all you." The case became a landmark in financial crime prosecution. David's architectural firm was exposed as one of the largest money laundering operations ever uncovered. The investigation led to over 30 convictions, with more pending internationally. 1 year into the aftermath, Interpol finally caught a break. David's attempt to access one of his hidden accounts triggered an alert. Within hours, he was in custody, his carefully constructed escape plan unraveling. Lowell attended the extradition hearing via video link, watching his former adversary's mask of arrogance crack as the evidence mounted. David's attempt to shift blame to Ruby and others fell apart under the weight of documented proof. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge interrupted one of his explanations, "this court has heard testimony from multiple families you destroyed. Your pattern of manipulation, exploitation, and destruction is well documented. Save your performances for your criminal trial." The trial itself was almost anticlimactic. David's criminal enterprise was laid bare, his methodology exposed. Each victim family testified about his manipulation. Each former employee revealed another layer of his schemes. When the sentence was announced, multiple life terms with no possibility of parole, David finally showed genuine emotion. Rage. "You think this ends here?" he snarled at Lowell outside the courtroom. "I built this empire once. I can build it again." "No," Lowell replied calmly. "You can't, because now everyone knows what you really are. A predator who destroys families to hide his crimes. Your time is over." Marcus completed his rehabilitation program with genuine effort, working through the psychological manipulation that had led to his choices. His relationship with Lowell remained strained, but they were slowly rebuilding trust through family counseling. "I understand now," Marcus said during one session, "how I used my anger about the rules, the structure." He made rebellion feel like freedom. "That's what predators do," the counselor explained. "They find your vulnerabilities and exploit them." Ruby served her time without further attempts at manipulation. Upon release, she found herself ostracized from the professional world. Her role in David's schemes had made her radioactive in the industry. The beach house that David had promised them came up for auction after asset seizure. Lowell bought it, not out of sentiment, but with a purpose. He turned it into a retreat for families healing from similar betrayals and manipulations. "Why keep the surveillance system?" Marcus asked during a weekend visit home from college, where he was slowly rebuilding his life. "As a reminder," Lowell said, glancing at the subtle cameras, "that truth, however painful, is always preferable to comfortable lies." Lowell's firm expanded its focus, specializing in uncovering similar criminal enterprises. The David Blackwood case became a template for investigating financial crimes hidden behind legitimate businesses. The network of families David had destroyed began healing. Some found closure in his conviction, others in connecting with fellow survivors. The beach house retreat became a symbol of recovery and resilience. Ruby, released after serving her sentence, found herself facing the consequences of her choices in ways prison hadn't prepared her for. No firm would hire her. Former friends avoided her. The professional and social circles she'd once navigated so confidently were permanently closed. Marcus graduated from community college, working part-time while continuing therapy. The relationship with his father would never return to what it was, but they were building something new based on truth rather than manipulation. The surveillance system remained a constant reminder of how quickly trust could be broken and how vigilance, while sometimes painful, was necessary. For Lowell, it represented not paranoia but pragmatism, a lesson learned about the importance of seeing people as they truly were, not as you wish them to be. In the end, David's attempt to destroy one family had led to his own destruction. His empire of lies, built on manipulation and betrayal, had crumbled under the weight of truth. And Lowell, the target he underestimated, stood among the ruins, stronger for having faced the storm. Extended epilogue. 10 years later, the beach house's renovation had transformed it from David Blackwood's symbol of manipulation into something entirely different. Large windows overlooked the Atlantic, letting morning light stream into a gathering space where families shared their stories of betrayal and recovery. A plaque by the entrance read, "Truth Foundation, Healing Through Understanding." Lowell Wolfe stood at these windows, watching a group of teenagers, all children of white-collar crime victims, participate in a trust-building exercise on the beach. 10 years had passed since the Blackwood case broke open, yet its ripples continued to spread. Another successful session, Peggy Conley asked, joining him at the window. Now retired from the FBI, she helped run the Foundation's investigative training program. "They're learning," Lowell replied, "understanding how predators like David target families, exploit vulnerabilities." He turned from the window. Lowell continued, "Speaking of which, just got word from our contacts." Peggy nodded. David's latest appeal was denied. "He's not handling maximum security well. Apparently, financial criminals don't earn much respect, even in prison." David Blackwood's fall had been total. After his extradition and conviction, investigators had uncovered even more layers to his criminal enterprise. The man who once commanded the billion-dollar empire now spent his days in a 6x8 cell, his attempts to maintain his manipulative control crumbling under the weight of multiple life sentences. "He tried sending another letter to Marcus last month," Peggy mentioned. "Same manipulation tactics, claims of caring, promises of hidden money, subtle threats wrapped in concern. Marcus sent it back unopened," Lowell said with quiet pride. "He's learned to recognize the patterns." Marcus Wolfe, now 27, had rebuilt his life from the ground up. After community college, he'd earned a degree in psychology, specializing in adolescent trauma. He now worked with the Truth Foundation, helping other children who'd been manipulated by predatory adults. "Dad," Marcus's voice came from the doorway. He'd grown into a thoughtful young man, the entitled teenager long gone. "The Kingston family just arrived. Their case is pretty similar to ours. Financial fraud, family manipulation. Yeah, the mother and oldest son were groomed by the CFO. Same pattern. Gifts, promises, turning them against the father." Marcus's expression darkened. "They need to understand what they're dealing with." "Take the lead on this one," Lowell said. "You know the signs better than anyone." The Foundation had helped dozens of families over the years, many referenced in the quarterly newsletter Marcus now held. Truth Watch, Spring 2034. David Blackwood's final appeal denied. 3 more executives from Blackwood Architecture's Singapore office convicted. New program launched for teenage victims of family manipulation. Support group expansion to cover 5 more states. The newsletter also contained a smaller item that brought grim satisfaction. Former Blackwood associate Ruby Clements released 2027, denied professional licensing for the 4th time. Licensing board cites ongoing concerns about ethical fitness. Ruby's post-prison life had become a cautionary tale. Released after 3 years, she found every professional door close. Her attempts to rebuild her career had failed. Her role in David's schemes made her untouchable in the architectural world. She tried rebranding, changing fields, even relocating. But the internet never forgot. Last they'd heard, she was working as a retail clerk in Nevada. Her designer lifestyle replaced by a studio apartment and discount clothes. Her attempts to contact Marcus had decreased over the years, each letter more desperate than the last until finally stopping altogether. She made her choices, Marcus had said after the last letter. Just like I made mine. The difference is, I chose to make amends. The foundation's success had led to Lowell expanding his forensic accounting firm. Wolf Financial Forensics now specialized in complex fraud cases involving family manipulation. They worked closely with law enforcement worldwide. Their methodology for uncovering similar schemes taught in FBI training programs. Your fathers changed how we approach these cases, a senior FBI instructor had told Marcus during a training session. We used to focus solely on the financial trails. Now we look for the human element. The families being weaponized against themselves. The investigation's ripple effects had transformed the financial crime landscape. The Blackwood method became a textbook term for schemes involving family manipulation. David's international network had led to reforms in architectural project financing, with new regulations specifically targeting the methods he used to hide criminal transactions. In a maximum security prison in Colorado, David Blackwood's empire had been reduced to a cell block. His reputation as a fallen financial genius remained. His attempts to maintain his manipulative control had failed against the harsh realities of prison life. The man who once commanded boardrooms now struggled to command respect from common criminals. His last letter to Marcus revealed his deterioration. You ungrateful fool. I made you. Everything you had, the gifts, the opportunities, came from me. Your pathetic father thinks he's won. But money like mine doesn't just disappear. When I get out, the letter devolved into increasingly unstable ranting. Marcus had sent it to the Foundation psychiatrist as a teaching tool in recognizing narcissistic breakdown. The Truth Foundation's beach house hosted monthly support group meetings. Families from across the country came to share their stories, learn the warning signs, and begin healing. The same rooms where David had once plotted destruction now witnessed reconstruction. It's not about forgiveness, Marcus often told the groups. It's about understanding. Understanding how they chose us, how they used us, and how we can make sure it never happens again. The surveillance system that had exposed the original betrayal had sparked an entire security consulting division. Wolf Security specialized in helping potential fraud targets protect themselves, their techniques refined from lessons learned during the Blackwood case. Lowell's reputation had grown beyond financial forensics. He regularly consulted with law enforcement agencies worldwide, helping them identify and prevent similar schemes. The patterns don't change, he explained during a recent training seminar. Predators like David think they're unique, innovative, but they all follow the same basic playbook. Find a vulnerability, exploit family bonds, destroy from within. The Foundation's files held updates on others from the case. David's former partners, those who'd helped him manipulate other families, served varying sentences. None had maintained their wealth or status. The architectural firm's legitimate employees, unknowing participants in the scheme, had struggled to rebuild their careers. The Blackwood name had become toxic in the industry. Families of David's previous victims had found some peace in his conviction, though the suicides he caused could never be undone. Ruby's last known communication had been a request to tell her story at a Foundation event. The letter spoke of redemption, understanding, growth. Lowell and Marcus had recognized the manipulative patterns immediately, the same ones David had once used on her. She still doesn't get it, Marcus had said, declining the request. She's not sorry for what she did. She's sorry she lost. The Foundation's success led to speaking engagements. Marcus, particularly, had become a powerful voice in discussing family manipulation and white-collar crime. His presentations combine professional insight with personal experience. They don't target weak families, he'd explained. They target strong ones. Break them down. Turn loyalty into a weapon. The gifts, the attention, the promises. They're not rewards. They're chains. Lowell's personal life had evolved as well. The experience had sharpened rather than hardened him. He developed a close network of friends and colleagues dedicated to preventing similar crimes. The betrayal had taught him to trust his instincts while remaining open to genuine connections. The surveillance system remained in his home, updated with new technology, but serving the same purpose, a reminder that truth, however painful, was preferable to comfortable lies. But now, it was just one layer of protection in a more comprehensive approach to security. 10 years after the case broke, its impact continued to ripple outward. The Truth Foundation's work had helped change how law enforcement approached family-involved financial crimes. The Blackwood case was studied in criminology courses, psychology programs, and law schools. The Beach House's guest book held hundreds of entries from families who'd found healing there. Each story different, yet following familiar patterns. The latest entry read simply, "Here, we finally understood. Here, we began to heal." As Lowell watched the sun set over the Atlantic, Marcus joined him on the deck. 10 years, Marcus said quietly. "Sometimes it feels like another lifetime." Lowell turned to his son. "You've helped a lot of people understand what we learned the hard way. That's the point, isn't it? Making sure some good comes from it all." Inside, another group session was beginning. More families learning to recognize manipulation, to understand betrayal, to rebuild trust. The Beach House, once promised as a reward for betrayal, had become a beacon of recovery. The Foundation's work continued, expanding into new areas: preventive education, corporate ethics training, family therapy programs. Each initiative built on lessons learned from the Blackwood case, each success a small victory against those who would weaponize family bonds. David Blackwood's empire had crumbled to dust, but from its ruins, something stronger had emerged: a network of understanding, support, and resilience. The predator who'd sought to destroy families had inadvertently created a force for protecting them. The evening light faded, and the Beach House's windows glowed warmly. Inside, people shared their stories, learned from each other, and began to heal. The surveillance cameras watched silently, their presence now a symbol of vigilance rather than paranoia. In the end, the truth had done more than set them free. It had given them purpose. The plaque by the door caught the last rays of sunlight. Truth Foundation. Because every family deserves to understand the past and protect their future. The story of betrayal had become a story of transformation. The weapons of destruction had been reformed into tools of healing. And in the gathering darkness, the Beach House stood as a testament to an eternal truth, that from the deepest wounds can come the greatest strength. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.